Introduction: The hidden forces that guide us. Betrayal. It's a word heavy with emotion, pain, anger, disbelief. Whether it's the sting of a broken promise, the devastation of infidelity, or the quiet self-betrayal that lingers in our private thoughts, betrayal cuts to the core of who we are. But what if I told you that betrayal is not just a failure of morality or loyalty? What if it's a mirror reflecting something much deeper, something hidden within the human psyche? Welcome to Carl Jung's Shadow Theory, the psychology behind betrayal, an exploration into the unseen layers of human behavior and the psychological forces that drive us to hurt others and ourselves. At the heart of this journey is a revolutionary idea introduced by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung, the concept of the shadow. According to Jung, the shadow is the unconscious part of our personality that contains the aspects of ourselves we reject or deny. It is the dark twin of our conscious identity, composed of impulses, desires, and traits that we hide not only from the world, but often from ourselves. But the shadow doesn't simply disappear because we ignore it. On the contrary, what is repressed in the unconscious eventually finds its way to the surface, often through projection, emotional eruptions, and yes, betrayal. Why do we cheat, lie, or deceive those we love? Why do we lash out at friends, abandon our principles, or sabotage our own success? More importantly, why do we often feel surprised, even helpless, when we commit acts that go against our values? Jung would say it is because our shadow is acting out, seizing control in moments when we're not fully aware of ourselves. This audiobook is not just about understanding betrayal. It's about unmasking the hidden drivers behind it. It's about recognizing how the shadow influences our relationships, distorts our perception, and shapes our personal and collective choices. Through betrayal, we are often confronted with the very parts of ourselves we wish to avoid. Throughout the coming chapters, we'll explore betrayal in its many forms, from romantic infidelity to friendship fallout, from familial wounds to societal hypocrisy. We'll uncover how suppressed fears, shame, and unresolved trauma manifest as acts of betrayal, and how acknowledging and integrating our shadow can lead to profound healing and wholeness. This journey won't be easy. Shadow work never is. It asks us to confront our inner darkness, to question our self-image, and to embrace the complexity of our human nature. But the rewards are immense. By facing the shadow, we reclaim the parts of ourselves that make us whole. And in that wholeness, we find the power to choose differently, to respond, not react, to heal, not harm. So if you've ever been betrayed or have betrayed others, this book is for you. If you're curious about the psychological roots of human behavior, or if you're simply ready to explore the deeper truth of who you are, you're in the right place. Let's step into the darkness, not to be consumed by it, but to illuminate it, because only by understanding the shadow can we truly begin to understand betrayal. Chapter 1. Understanding the Jungian Shadow. Imagine yourself as an iceberg. The part above water, the part others see, is your conscious self, your personality, your values, your intentions. But beneath the surface lies a vast, hidden mass. This submerged portion is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of traits, memories, impulses, and emotions we repress, reject, or deny. To understand betrayal through Jung's lens, we must first understand this psychological shadow. The shadow isn't just a metaphor. It's a living, dynamic force within each of us. It holds everything we believe is unacceptable about ourselves. It's where we bury our envy, our aggression, our lust, our fear, and our shame. It also holds our unused creativity, denied potential, and unlived desires. In other words, it's not all bad. It's just everything we didn't allow ourselves to be. The origins of the shadow: from childhood, we begin to form a sense of self, what Jung referred to as the persona, or social mask. This is who we believe we should be to gain love, approval, and safety. As we construct this persona, we simultaneously begin disowning the parts of ourselves that don't fit the mold. Were you told to stop being too loud? That emotion goes into the shadow. Were you mocked for showing fear or crying? That vulnerability gets buried too. Our families, schools, cultures, and religions all shape this process. They define what is good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. And so, little by little, we exile pieces of our true nature. Not because we are evil, but because we are trying to survive. Over time, what's repressed becomes unconscious, and that's when it begins to operate in secret. The shadow is not evil. It's unconscious. One of Jung's most revolutionary insights was that the shadow isn't necessarily evil. It's unconscious. This means we are often unaware of what's in it. The problem isn't the shadow itself. The problem is when we don't know we have one. Unacknowledged, the shadow begins to act out through projection, emotional triggers, addictions, obsessions, and, crucially, betrayal. We think we're in control, but really the shadow is pulling the strings behind the scenes. Consider this. Have you ever been shocked by your own reaction to something? Have you ever said, "I don't know why I did that, it's not like me"? That moment of confusion is often a brush with the shadow. It acted out without your permission, because it was never integrated into your conscious identity. Projection. Seeing our shadow in others. One of the most common ways we experience the shadow is through projection. This is when we see in others what we can't accept in ourselves. We might criticize someone's arrogance while being blind to our own. We might accuse a partner of being manipulative while denying our own subtle control tactics. Projection is the mind's way of avoiding discomfort. Rather than feel shame or face our flaws, we project them onto others. This creates conflict, misunderstanding, and yes, betrayal. When you cannot face your own inner liar, you will condemn the liar in someone else with a vengeance. The shadow and the seeds of betrayal. Here lies the link between the shadow and betrayal. Most betrayal doesn't come from conscious malice. It comes from the repressed parts of ourselves, the desires we deny, the rage we suppress, the insecurities we refuse to name. When a person cheats, they may not be seeking to hurt their partner. They may be unconsciously trying to feel something they've long buried. When a friend gossips behind your back, it might be a projection of their own feelings of inadequacy or envy. Betrayal, then, is often an unconscious eruption, a moment when the shadow breaks through the mask and acts out what's been denied for too long. Embracing the shadow. The first step to wholeness, Jung's solution to the shadow, wasn't suppression or punishment, it was integration. This means bringing awareness to your shadow and making peace with it. It means looking honestly at your inner world and saying, yes, this is also me. Integration doesn't mean acting on every impulse or becoming someone you're not. It means acknowledging your complexity. It means reclaiming the full range of your humanity, not just the pretty parts. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is wholeness. Because when you know your shadow, it loses its power to control you. You become more grounded, more authentic, and less likely to betray yourself or others. Shadow work. Awareness is the beginning, so how do you begin? Start by asking difficult questions. What qualities in others trigger strong emotional reactions?
In me? What do I most fear people discovering about me? What kind of person do I secretly judge or despise? When have I betrayed someone? And what was I truly feeling at the time? These questions are not comfortable, but they are necessary.
They are the doorway into the shadow, and they open the path to profound self-understanding. Chapter 2. The anatomy of betrayal. Betrayal is a word we often associate with broken trust, infidelity in a relationship, disloyalty in friendship, dishonesty in business. But betrayal is more than just an external act. It's a deeply emotional wound, and the pain it causes goes far beyond the surface. Why does betrayal hurt so much? What makes it feel like an earthquake in the soul? To truly understand betrayal, we must dissect it, not just as an action, but as a psychological experience. We must look at its origins, its emotional architecture, and its connection to the human identity. This is where psychology and the unconscious mind intersect. and where Jung's shadow theory begins to illuminate what lies beneath the surface. Betrayal as a psychological rupture. Betrayal breaks more than promises. It breaks a part of our inner narrative. It fractures the belief that someone we trusted was who we thought they were. But even more than that, it often shakes our sense of self. When someone betrays us, we ask, how did I not see it coming? Or was I not enough? Or what does this say about me? That's because betrayal doesn't just reflect the betrayer's actions. It mirrors something back to us about our own vulnerabilities, blind spots, and emotional attachments. Trust and identity, the core of betrayal. At the core of betrayal is trust. Trust is more than a social agreement. It's the emotional glue that holds relationships together. When trust is broken, the betrayal strikes at the heart of our identity, because we often build our self-worth, our safety, and our worldview around those we trust most. For example, a child betrayed by a parent may internalize the message, I'm not worthy of love. A partner betrayed in a romantic relationship might feel, I wasn't enough. A friend betrayed by another might conclude, people can't be trusted. These conclusions may seem extreme, but in moments of betrayal, the emotional brain overrides logic. The wound goes deep because it touches something primal, our need for connection, belonging, and emotional safety. The role of the shadow in betrayal. Now let's return to Jung's shadow. The shadow isn't just behind why betrayal happens, it also explains how we experience it. When someone betrays us, it often activates our own shadow. Here's how. You may feel deep rage, but that anger might be masking a repressed fear of abandonment. You might feel the need for revenge, but beneath that is a wound you've never addressed. You may begin to doubt your judgment or self-worth, revealing your inner critic or childhood conditioning. Betrayal exposes the very parts of ourselves we try to hide, and just like the betrayer is often acting from their own unconscious drives, so are we in how we react, cope, and heal from the betrayal. The betrayer and the betrayed. Two sides of the same shadow. It's tempting to draw a clear line between the betrayer and the betrayed. One is the villain, the other the victim. But psychology teaches us it's rarely that simple. The betrayer may be acting out their suppressed shadow, perhaps their need for validation, control, or freedom. But the betrayed often has a shadow too, which may include dependency, idealization, or self-deception. This doesn't mean the betrayed is to blame, but it does mean that betrayal is an invitation, a painful one, to explore your own unconscious patterns. Why did you trust this person? Were there red flags you ignored? What needs were you projecting onto them? This is not about blame. It's about empowerment. The more aware you are of your own inner landscape, the less likely you are to fall into cycles of betrayal again and again. Common forms of betrayal. Let's break down some common forms of betrayal and the psychological dynamics behind them. Romantic infidelity, often rooted in repressed desires, unmet emotional needs, or fears of intimacy. The shadow might contain a need for freedom, attention, or dominance that was never acknowledged in the relationship. Friendship betrayal usually involves jealousy, competition, or unspoken resentment. The shadow could include hidden envy, or a deep fear of being inferior or replaced. Family betrayal can be the most deeply rooted. Think of parental neglect, favoritism, or broken boundaries. The shadow here often involves childhood wounds, both in the betrayer and the betrayed. Self-betrayal, perhaps the most overlooked. This is when you abandon your own values, needs, or truth for approval, comfort, or avoidance. Self-betrayal is a key way the shadow operates silently, and it often sets the stage for external betrayals. The betrayal trauma. Response betrayal is a form of trauma. Psychologically, it activates the same brain circuits as physical pain. In fact, studies using brain scans show that betrayal triggers areas of the brain associated with survival, particularly the amygdala, which processes fear and threat. This explains the emotional chaos that often follows. Obsessive thinking, flashbacks, loss of trust in others. anxiety or depression, emotional numbness. These aren't just overreactions. They're signs that your emotional system has been shocked. The mind is trying to reconcile the reality of betrayal with the image it had of the person or situation. Denial and the delusion of control. Another common response to betrayal is denial. It couldn't be true. Maybe I misunderstood. They didn't mean it. This is the mind's attempt to regain a sense of control. But denial is dangerous. It allows betrayal to repeat, especially if it aligns with your unconscious fears or past conditioning. Jung would say that denial is a way to avoid confronting the shadow. Because to fully accept betrayal, you must accept that people are capable of darkness, and that includes you. Toward healing, acknowledging the pain. Before healing can begin, the pain of betrayal must be acknowledged. Too often we suppress our emotions or rush into forgiveness without doing the inner work. But true healing requires honesty, not just about what happened, but about how it affected you. Ask yourself, what story did this betrayal destroy? What parts of myself do I feel ashamed of because of this? What emotions have I buried to keep functioning? These questions don't have easy answers, but they are the start of integration. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. Chapter 3. Inside the mind of the betrayer, we often ask, how could they do this to me? We seek answers in their actions, their words, even their silence. But to understand betrayal deeply, we must enter the most uncomfortable territory, the mind of the betrayer. Who are they? What drives them? What shadowy forces lurk beneath their choices? Carl Jung's Shadow Theory doesn't just explain the pain of betrayal from the victim's perspective. It helps us unlock the psychological reality of those who betray. Because the truth is, most people don't betray out of pure malice. More often, betrayal is the byproduct of unconscious motivations, repressed desires, and hidden fears. It's less about the person being betrayed, and more about the betrayer's unresolved inner conflicts. Betrayal as a manifestation of the shadow Jung proposed that every human has a shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche that houses traits we deny, repress, or reject. These could be selfishness, jealousy, lust, cowardice, or even power hunger. Over time, the more we suppress these traits, the more they build pressure in the unconscious, until they erupt. Betrayal often happens when a person's shadow gains control. The betrayer acts out a hidden part of themselves they've long denied. For instance, a spouse cheats not because they don't love their partner, but because they've repressed their need for autonomy, passion, or validation. A friend gossips out of jealousy, rooted in feelings of inferiority they've buried for years. A business partner embezzles due to a suppressed hunger for power or control masked under years of compliance. These actions aren't logical, they're emotional outbursts from the shadow. The betrayer often feels guilt afterward because they acted in ways their conscious mind never intended. The shadow and self-deception. One of the most dangerous features of the shadow is its ability to justify betrayal through self-deception. The betrayer may rationalize their actions. They didn't appreciate me. I deserved better. It's not really that bad. These narratives serve as protective armor for the ego. They help the betrayer avoid facing the discomfort of who they've become. But in reality, these rationalizations often come from deep emotional wounds, abandonment, childhood neglect, or years of internalized resentment. Dual selves, the public mask versus the private shadow Jung emphasize the conflict between the persona, our public mask, and the shadow, our hidden self. The greater the gap between the two, the more likely a person is to betray. For example, someone who presents themselves as morally upright, loyal, and trustworthy might be repressing desires for excitement, rebellion, or control. A perfect spouse may secretly harbor fantasies or emotions they never express, until they burst forth in the form of infidelity or secrecy. This internal dissonance creates psychological tension. Eventually, the person caves to the shadow, not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious. Shadow projection and scapegoating. Interestingly, Betrayers often project their own shadow onto the people they hurt. They may accuse the betrayed of being too controlling, too needy, or not enough, when in fact those judgments reflect their own inner conflicts. This is known as shadow projection, a defense mechanism where we deny our undesirable traits and instead project them onto others. Betrayers use this to absolve themselves of guilt and avoid responsibility. Examples include a partner who cheats blaming their spouse for being emotionally distant, ignoring their own fear of vulnerability, a friend who betrays another by saying, "You made me feel less important," masking their own jealousy and insecurity, a boss who scapegoats an employee when in fact they fear being seen as incompetent. The act of betrayal becomes a way to externalize their internal conflict, even if it devastates those around them. Fear, repression, and betrayal. Patterns betrayal is rarely a one-time event. It often follows a pattern. People who betray once without reflection or healing are likely to do it again. Why? Because the underlying psychological structure hasn't changed. Common underlying patterns include fear of intimacy, they get close, then self-sabotage. Addiction to validation, they betray to feel seen, admired, or powerful. Self-loathing. Deep down, they don't believe they deserve healthy relationships. Compulsive control. They betray to reclaim dominance or autonomy. Unless these unconscious patterns are made conscious, the shadow will continue to rule from the dark. Guilt. In the aftermath, contrary to popular belief, many betrayers do feel guilt, but how they deal with that guilt depends on their ego maturity. Some deny and minimize, numbing the shame. Blame the victim, creating distance. Escape through distraction, addiction, or avoidance. Spiral into self-hatred, creating cycles of self-destruction. But a few brave individuals own their betrayal, confront their shadow, and begin the hard journey of integration. For them, betrayal becomes a wake-up call, a psychological death that can lead to rebirth. Can a betrayer be redeemed? Jung believed that wholeness comes not from being good, but from being aware. Redemption is possible, but only through conscious inner work. The betrayer must face the pain they caused, confront their shadow without excuse, understand the deeper motives behind their actions, take responsibility, and make amends where possible. Learn from the darkness, not run from it. The path of redemption is not about perfection, it's about integration, making peace with one's brokenness and becoming more whole. What this means for the betrayed understanding. The betrayer's mind doesn't excuse the harm, but it helps the betrayed move from powerlessness to clarity. When you see betrayal not as a reflection of your worth, but of the betrayer's unconscious conflict, it shifts your healing. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What part of their shadow was I caught in?" This knowledge is powerful. It doesn't erase the pain, but it helps you rebuild from a place of wisdom rather than victimhood. Chapter 4. The Silent Wound. Understanding. Self-betrayal. Betrayal is often painted as something that comes from others, an external wound inflicted by someone we trust. But what if the most insidious betrayal is not committed by others, but by ourselves? Self-betrayal is the silent wound, the subtle act of turning against our own truth. It is when we say yes when we mean no. Stay quiet when our soul screams to speak. Abandon our needs to keep peace. Ignore red flags because we fear rejection. Shapeshift to please others, losing pieces of who we are. Carl Jung's Shadow Theory brings us face to face with this inner fracture. To truly understand betrayal in all its forms, we must confront the ways we betray ourselves and why we do it. The origin of self-betrayal begins early in life. As children, we learn quickly which parts of us are acceptable and which are not. If we express anger, we may be punished. If we show sadness, we may be told to toughen up. If we speak our truth and it's dismissed or mocked, we start to suppress it. To survive, we adapt. This adaptation becomes the breeding ground for self-betrayal. We wear masks to fit in, silence our voice to avoid conflict, and bury our authentic needs to be loved. Over time, we forget what our true voice even sounds. Like Jung described this process as the formation of the persona, the socially acceptable mask we wear. But beneath that mask lies the shadow, holding all the parts we've disowned, including our authenticity, self-betrayal, and the shadow. Every time we go against our intuition, we feed the shadow. Every time we ignore our boundaries or pretend to be okay when we're not, we strengthen the divide within ourselves. The shadow then becomes a mirror of our inner rejection. When we suppress anger, we attract people who violate us. When we deny our worth, we accept crumbs instead of love. When we ignore our truth, we become lost in roles that don't belong to us. Eventually, we feel betrayed by life, by others, by the world. But at the core, it's our own silence that haunts us. The cost of abandoning ourselves, self-betrayal, comes at a high cost. It shows up as chronic resentment, emotional numbness, anxiety or depression, exhaustion from pretending, difficulty trusting ourselves. The more we betray our inner truth, the more we disconnect from our core identity. We become strangers to ourselves, and then we wonder why others don't truly see us. We're not even showing up as us, we're showing up as who we think they want. This disconnection makes us vulnerable to external betrayal. When we don't honor ourselves, we unconsciously tolerate those who won't honor us either. Why we keep betraying ourselves. Even when we become aware of our self-abandonment, we often repeat it. Why? Because of fear. Fear of rejection. If I say what I need, they'll leave. Fear of judgment. If I show who I really am, I won't be accepted. Fear of conflict. If I stand my ground, they'll get angry. Fear of being alone. It's better to stay silent than lose them. These fears are deeply embedded in the psyche, often rooted in childhood wounds. Jung taught that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. Self-betrayal isn't just a habit. It's an unconscious coping mechanism, one that we must expose, understand, and ultimately transform. Healing begins. With awareness, the first step in healing self-betrayal is recognition. We must become radically honest with ourselves. Ask, where in my life am I pretending? Whose approval am I chasing? What truth am I avoiding? What boundaries am I constantly overriding? These questions hurt, but they illuminate the path to healing, rebuilding self-trust. Once we acknowledge our self-betrayal, the work is to rebuild trust with ourselves. This is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. Here's how. Honor your feelings. Stop judging your emotions. They are messengers, not enemies. Say no when you mean no. Every no is a yes to yourself. Speak your truth. Even when your voice shakes, speak. Set boundaries and enforce them, even if others don't like it. Keep promises to yourself. Show your subconscious that you are dependable. Each small act of self-loyalty rewires your psyche and integrates your shadow. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself you once abandoned. Shadow integration and self-love. Jung emphasized that healing comes through integration, not suppression. To heal self-betrayal, we must integrate our shadow, the messy, emotional, passionate, imperfect parts of us we were taught to hide. Self-love is not about being flawless. It's about wholeness, embracing all of who we are, even the parts we've been taught to reject. When we stop betraying ourselves, something remarkable happens. Our relationships become more honest. Our boundaries become sacred. Our energy returns. Our intuition sharpens. And the external betrayals we once tolerated stop, because we are no longer betraying ourselves. Final thoughts. Self-betrayal is the most overlooked form of betrayal, yet it's the one that sets the tone for every other. Until we reclaim our truth, we remain vulnerable, not just to being hurt by others, but to slowly eroding from within. Jung's wisdom invites us not just to look outward at betrayal, but inward. In doing so, we discover that the path to healing doesn't begin with demanding more from others, but with demanding honesty from ourselves. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the shadow is formed, what shapes it, how it hides, and why facing it is the cornerstone of psychological freedom. Chapter 5: The Making of the Shadow: Childhood, Conditioning, and Suppression. The human mind is like a garden. In childhood, seeds are planted, some by love, others by fear. As we grow, what blooms on the surface is what the world sees. Our behavior, our words, our self. But beneath that soil, hidden from the eye, lies something else entirely. This is where the shadow lives. Carl Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of our personality that the conscious ego does not identify with. But how did it get there? Why do we exile parts of ourselves into this psychological basement? The answer lies in the tender years of childhood, where we first learned what parts of us were welcomed and which parts were not. Childhood, the birthplace of the shadow. As children, we are raw, unfiltered, and whole. We express everything. We cry when hurt, laugh when joyful, scream when angry. But very soon we begin to receive messages. Don't cry, that's weak. Stop being so dramatic. Be a good boy, girl. That's not how big kids act. These are not just words, they are lessons. We learn that love and acceptance are conditional. If we want to belong, we must edit ourselves. So, we begin to cut away the parts that are too much, too loud, too emotional, too sensitive, or too different. These disowned parts don't disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, forming the shadow. The role of conditioning is the process of learning through repetition and reinforcement. Over time, we're taught to value some traits and shame others. For example, a child praised for being obedient may suppress leadership. A child shamed for being angry may internalize guilt and become passive. A child who feels unsafe expressing vulnerability may become emotionally numb. The child conforms, not because they are weak, but because belonging is a survival need. We adapt to keep the love of our caregivers, our community, and our culture. But that adaptation comes with a cost, the fragmentation of the self. Suppression and its consequences. What we suppress does not die. It festers. Suppressed traits and emotions find their way out, often in distorted or unconscious forms. Jung called this shadow projection. We project onto others what we cannot accept in ourselves. Here's how it shows up. If we repress anger, we judge angry people. If we deny ambition, we resent the successful. If we suppress vulnerability, we mock the emotional. If we hide our power, we attract those who abuse theirs. The shadow becomes a mirror, reflecting back what we're unwilling to own. This is why Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The false self versus the true self. The persona is the mask we wear to survive. It's the version of us shaped by rewards, punishments, and expectations. It's the good girl, the tough guy, the quiet one, the achiever. But behind the mask is the true self, complex, multidimensional, alive. When we live solely through our persona, we live inauthentically, and the more we repress, the more our shadow grows. The shadow is not inherently evil. It's simply the unlived parts of us. In Betrayal, this is crucial. We often feel betrayed not just by others, but by life, by fate, by the roles we've been forced to play. But in truth, it is the betrayal of the true self that haunts us most. Shadow accumulation over time. As we age, the shadow doesn't vanish, it evolves. In teenage years, it may appear as rebellion or insecurity. In adulthood, it may manifest as addiction, toxic relationships, or emotional numbness. In midlife, it often erupts as a crisis of identity. The infamous midlife crisis is, in essence, a shadow awakening. When ignored, the shadow disrupts our lives. But when faced, it transforms us. Facing the shadow without shame. The biggest barrier to shadow work is shame. We think, I shouldn't feel this way, or I'm a bad person for having these thoughts. But Jung invites us to look without judgment. The shadow is not a flaw. It is a natural psychological mechanism. It formed to protect us. Our task now is to reparent ourselves, to welcome the emotions we were told to hide, to speak the truths we were punished for expressing, to give love to the parts we once disowned. This is not easy work, but it is sacred work. How suppression relates to betrayal. Why is all this important in a book about betrayal? Because betrayal often begins in childhood, not through dramatic acts, but through subtle conditioning. Being told we're too much or not enough. Being loved for our performance, not our presence. Being rejected when we express truth. We learn early on that being real can cost us love. So we betray ourselves to keep others comfortable. And then, later in life, when someone betrays us, it reactivates that original wound, the one where we had to abandon ourselves to survive. Moving toward integration healing means bringing the shadow into the light. It means unlearning the false scripts and rewriting a new narrative. This involves awareness, noticing our triggers, projections, and patterns. Compassion, approaching our inner wounds with gentleness. Expression, allowing suppressed parts to have a voice. Integration, reclaiming our wholeness. When we do this, we stop being controlled by the shadow and start being guided by our authentic self. Chapter 5, The Making of the Shadow. Childhood, Conditioning, and Suppression. The human mind is like a garden. In childhood, seeds are planted, some by love, others by fear. As we grow, what blooms on the surface is what the world sees. Our behavior, our words, our self. But beneath that soil, hidden from the eye, lies something else entirely. This is where the shadow lives. Carl Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of our personality that the conscious ego does not identify with. But how did it get there? Why do we exile parts of ourselves into this psychological basement? The answer lies in the tender years of childhood, where we first learned what parts of us were welcomed and which parts were not. Childhood, the birthplace of the shadow. As children, we are raw, unfiltered, and whole. We express everything. We cry when hurt, laugh when joyful, scream when angry. But very soon we begin to receive messages. Don't cry, that's weak. Stop being so dramatic. Be a good boy, girl. That's not how big kids act. These are not just words, they are lessons. We learn that love and acceptance are conditional. If we want to belong, we must edit ourselves. So, we begin to cut away the parts that are too much, too loud, too emotional, too sensitive, or too different. These disowned parts don't disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, forming the shadow. The role of conditioning is the process of learning through repetition and reinforcement. Over time, we're taught to value some traits and shame others. For example, a child praised for being obedient may suppress leadership. A child shamed for being angry may internalize guilt and become passive. A child who feels unsafe expressing vulnerability may become emotionally numb. The child conforms, not because they are weak, but because belonging is a survival need. We adapt to keep the love of our caregivers, our community, and our culture. But that adaptation comes with a cost, the fragmentation of the self. Suppression and its consequences. What we suppress does not die. It festers. Suppressed traits and emotions find their way out, often in distorted or unconscious forms. Jung called this shadow projection. We project onto others what we cannot accept in ourselves. Here's how it shows up. If we repress anger, we judge angry people. If we deny ambition, we resent the successful. If we suppress vulnerability, we mock the emotional. If we hide our power, we attract those who abuse theirs. The shadow becomes a mirror, reflecting back what we're unwilling to own. This is why Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The false self versus the true self. The persona is the mask we wear to survive. It's the version of us shaped by rewards, punishments, and expectations. It's the good girl, the tough guy, the quiet one, the achiever. But behind the mask is the true self, complex, multidimensional, alive. When we live solely through our persona, we live inauthentically, and the more we repress, the more our shadow grows. The shadow is not inherently evil. It's simply the unlived parts of us. In betrayal, this is crucial. We often feel betrayed not just by others, but by life, by fate, by the roles we've been forced to play. But in truth, it is the betrayal of the true self that haunts us most. Shadow accumulation over time. As we age, the shadow doesn't vanish, it evolves. In teenage years, it may appear as rebellion or insecurity. In adulthood, it may manifest as addiction, toxic relationships, or emotional numbness. In midlife, it often erupts as a crisis of identity. The infamous midlife crisis is, in essence, a shadow awakening. When ignored, the shadow disrupts our lives. But when faced, it transforms us. Facing the shadow without shame. The biggest barrier to shadow work is shame. We think, I shouldn't feel this way, or I'm a bad person for having these thoughts. But Jung invites us to look without judgment. The shadow is not a flaw. It is a natural psychological mechanism. It formed to protect us. Our task now is to reparent ourselves, to welcome the emotions we were told to hide, to speak the truths we were punished for expressing, to give love to the parts we once disowned. This is not easy work, but it is sacred work. How suppression relates to betrayal. Why is all this important in a book about betrayal? Because betrayal often begins in childhood, not through dramatic acts, but through subtle conditioning. Being told we're too much or not enough. Being loved for our performance, not our presence. Being rejected when we express truth. We learn early on that being real can cost us love. So we betray ourselves to keep others comfortable. And then, later in life, when someone betrays us, it reactivates that original wound, the one where we had to abandon ourselves to survive. Moving toward integration healing means bringing the shadow into the light. It means unlearning the false scripts and rewriting a new narrative. This involves awareness, noticing our triggers, projections, and patterns. Compassion, approaching our inner wounds with gentleness. Expression, allowing suppressed parts to have a voice. Integration, reclaiming our wholeness. When we do this, we stop being controlled by the shadow and start being guided by our authentic self. Dhamma Chapter 6. Betrayal in Relationships. The echo of the shadow. There is no wound quite like betrayal. It cuts deeper than a breakup, stings longer than a lie, and often leaves scars we don't understand for years. But why does betrayal hurt so profoundly? Why does it shake the very foundation of who we are? To answer that, we must turn inward, toward the shadow. According to Carl Jung, betrayal is not just a moral failure by others. It is also a mirror held up to the unhealed, unclaimed parts of ourselves. In this chapter, we uncover how our relationships become the battlegrounds where our hidden shadow plays out, and how betrayal is often the cry of a self we have long abandoned. Why betrayal hurts so deeply. Betrayal violates trust, but more than that, it violates identity. When a partner cheats, it challenges our worth. When a friend lies, it shakes our perception of safety. When a family member deceives, it fractures our sense of belonging. We don't just feel betrayed by the person, we feel exposed. The emotional pain stems from the collapse of the story we've told ourselves. I was safe and I was loved, I was chosen. And beneath this collapse lies the shadow, filled with all the fears and insecurities we thought we'd buried. The shadow's role in relationships. Jung emphasized that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. Nowhere is this more apparent than in our relationships. We are drawn to people not just based on chemistry or compatibility, but also based on unconscious needs, the need to be validated, the desire to be rescued, the longing to feel whole. Unconsciously, we often choose partners and friends who mirror our shadow traits, not because we're self-sabotaging, but because the psyche seeks integration. The person who betrays us may be playing out what we haven't yet claimed within ourselves. Shadow attraction. The magnetic pull shadow attraction is the phenomenon where we are drawn to people who embody traits we suppress. For example, if we hide our aggression, we may be drawn to dominant personalities. If we suppress our independence, we may cling to controlling partners. If we deny our self-worth, we may settle for those who treat us poorly. This magnetic pull isn't coincidence, it's an unconscious attempt to bring the shadow into the light. But when the relationship inevitably collapses, it can feel like betrayal. What really ends is the illusion that someone else can complete what we've not owned within. The psychology of betrayal activates core wounds. Abandonment, I'm not worth staying for. Rejection, I'm not lovable, as I am. Powerlessness, I have no control over my own life. Shame, there must be something wrong with me. Each of these wounds likely began in childhood, buried deep in the unconscious. The betrayal reactivates them, pulling them into consciousness. This is where Jung's brilliance comes in. He saw betrayal not just as tragedy, but as opportunity. A chance to meet the shadow, to ask, what part of me is asking to be seen? Betrayal as self-revelation. Strangely enough, betrayal is often a mirror, not a verdict. When someone betrays us, they may be revealing the boundaries we never set, the needs we ignored, the red flags we justified, the truth we didn't want to face. None of this means we are to blame for betrayal, but it does mean that betrayal can be a portal to self-awareness. It brings forth the hidden stories we tell ourselves and the parts of our psyche we've refused to confront. Projection and betrayal. Jung warned that we often project our unlived lives onto others. In relationships, this looks like expecting someone to love us unconditionally when we don't love ourselves, hoping someone will make us feel whole when we are fragmented within, believing someone is our savior when we have abandoned our own power. When those illusions shatter, we feel betrayed. But sometimes it is the illusion, not the person, that betrays us. The real pain stems from waking up to our own projections, from pain to power. The gift within the wound shadow work invites us to sit with the pain of betrayal, not to wallow in it, but to learn from it. To ask, what did I ignore? What part of myself did I give away? What truth have I been unwilling to face? Healing betrayal is not about revenge or forgetting. It's about reclamation, reclaiming boundaries, reclaiming worth, reclaiming the disowned parts of the self. Jung believed that healing the shadow was the key to individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. Patterns of repeated betrayal. Many people experience betrayal again and again, not because they're cursed, but because the lesson has not yet been learned. Each betrayal is a wake-up call. The more we ignore the inner signals, the louder the outer chaos becomes. But when we begin to turn inward, when we integrate our shadow, we start to choose differently. We attract healthier people, set stronger boundaries, communicate more clearly, love from fullness, not lack. The pattern breaks when the shadow is seen and integrated. Forgiveness and shadow. Integration, forgiveness, and betrayal is often misunderstood. It is not about excusing harmful behavior. It's about releasing the grip of resentment so we can reclaim our energy. Forgiveness becomes easier when we understand the shadow, when we see how others act from their own unhealed wounds, when we see how we abandoned ourselves, when we take radical responsibility for our healing. Forgiveness then becomes a tool of freedom, not approval. Chapter 7. Shadow projections. How we see in others. What we hide in ourselves. Imagine you're pointing a finger at someone who irritates you. Loud, selfish, arrogant. But what if, instead of just seeing them, you're actually seeing a part of yourself? A part you've disowned, repressed, or rejected? This is the essence of projection, a core concept in Carl Jung's Shadow Theory. It's not just about psychology. It's about how we build our world, frame our relationships, and understand betrayal. Projection is the lens through which our shadow reveals itself, not directly within, but through the mirrors of others. What is projection? Projection is when we unconsciously assign parts of ourselves, often parts we don't like or aren't aware of, onto someone else. It's like seeing your own reflection on a movie screen, but believing it's the actor. According to Jung, the shadow cannot always be seen directly because it lives in the unconscious, so instead it emerges through projection. A person criticizing others for being selfish might be denying their own unmet needs. Someone constantly spotting arrogance in others might be suppressing their own pride. A person deeply hurt by disloyalty might harbor hidden fears about their own trustworthiness. We don't just react to people. We react to parts of ourselves we see in them. The world is our mirror, Jung wrote. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. It's not just poetic. It's psychological truth. Here's how projection plays out. The shadow projected onto enemies. We demonize those who threaten our beliefs or identities because they carry traits we're unwilling to see in ourselves. The shadow projected onto lovers. We idealize them, hoping they'll complete us, not realizing we've projected our unlived dreams onto their image. The shadow and family dynamics. We often clash most with family because they reflect aspects of ourselves that we can't escape or deny. What we fear or despise in others is often a signal, not a verdict, a clue pointing inward. The psychology behind projection is a defense mechanism. It protects our ego from facing truths that feel threatening or shameful. When we see the flaws in others, we can avoid the discomfort of confronting them in ourselves. This has several effects. Short-term relief. It's their fault, not mine. Reinforced denial. We maintain a false image of ourselves. Distorted perception. We fail to see people as they are, only as we imagine them. But over time, projection becomes a prison. We lose sight of our authentic self and build relationships on illusions, expectations, and disappointment. Projection and betrayal. Many betrayals are rooted in projection. We believe someone has let us down, but often they've only failed to live up to the story we wrote about them. Consider a friend you thought was perfect betrays you. Were they perfect, or did you project your ideal onto them? A partner cheats. Did you see warning signs but ignore them because you projected loyalty onto them? Projection blinds us to reality. When the illusion collapses, it feels like betrayal. But the deeper betrayal is often within. We betrayed ourselves by refusing to see the truth, reclaiming the projection. The path to healing is not by blaming others, but by reclaiming what we've projected. Here's how. Notice strong emotional reactions. Intense feelings, love, hate, admiration, disgust, often signal projection. Ask, what exactly is triggering me? Ask, is this mine? When judging others, pause and reflect. Is this quality something I'm disowning in myself? Identify the trait, name the trait that bothers or captivates you. Is it arrogance, neediness, independence? Now ask, where does this exist in me? Integrate, don't eliminate. The goal is not to remove the trait, but to own it. Maybe that arrogance you despise is a call to develop confidence. Maybe that clinginess reflects a suppressed need for connection. The gift of projection, once we understand projection, it becomes a powerful tool, not just for self-awareness, but for healing. Our triggers become teachers. Our enemies become mirrors. Our heartbreak becomes a portal to integration. Projection reveals what's unfinished within. When we reclaim our projections, we take back the power we've given away. We stop needing others to complete us or wound us, and start meeting ourselves honestly. Owning our light as well as darkness. Jung also spoke of the golden shadow. Not just the dark traits we project, but the beautiful ones. When you admire someone's courage, could it be a sign of your own untapped strength? When you envy someone's creativity, Could it be your soul's call to express? When you see greatness in others, it often means it lives in you too. Projection is not only about what we dislike, it's also about the gifts we've buried. A practical exercise. The projection. Journal. Start a daily or weekly projection. Journal. Write down, who triggered you or captivated you? What was the trait you noticed? How does this trait show up in you, either repressed, unclaimed, or underdeveloped? Over time, you'll begin to map your shadow and reclaim both your darkness and your brilliance. Chapter 8. The Shadow in the Workplace. Ambition, competition, and hidden motives. The workplace can be a battleground, full of ambition, rivalry, and power plays. Yet beneath the surface of emails, meetings, and deadlines lies an unseen force, shaping our actions and decisions, the shadow. In this chapter, we'll explore how Carl Jung's shadow theory illuminates the hidden dynamics of the professional world, why betrayal often happens at work, and how recognizing our shadow can transform competition into collaboration. The workplace. A mirror of the shadow. Workplaces bring together diverse personalities, each carrying their own shadows, unconscious fears, insecurities, desires, and unresolved wounds. Ambition can mask deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. Competition can hide fears of being unworthy. Hidden motives often stem from unacknowledged needs for control, recognition, or safety. The shadow doesn't disappear when we clock in. It often intensifies under pressure. Ambition and the shadow. Ambition is a double-edged sword. On one side, it drives innovation and success. On the other, it can fuel jealousy, greed, and ruthlessness when the shadow remains unconscious. For example, an employee may push aggressively for promotion, driven by a need to prove self-worth rather than genuine passion. A manager might micromanage because of a hidden fear of losing control. Office gossip can be a way to project one's own flaws onto others. Recognizing these shadow motives helps us manage ambition constructively rather than destructively. Competition as a shadow game. Competition at work often triggers shadow reactions. We might see colleagues as threats or enemies, which stirs fear of failure, resentment over perceived unfairness, desire to dominate or undermine others. Jung believed that competition often reflects internal battles with our own insecurities. When we feel threatened internally, we externalize that threat onto others. This explains why workplaces can become arenas of betrayal, where trust is fragile and alliance is fragile. Hidden motives and office politics. Office politics is a perfect example of the shadow at play. People act out of unconscious motives that can be difficult to recognize, seeking approval to fill an inner void, manipulating others to protect fragile egos, withholding information as a way to gain power. These hidden motives can lead to betrayal, backstabbing, and toxic work environments. Awareness as a path to transformation. Awareness of the shadow is the first step to breaking negative workplace cycles. When we understand our hidden fears and desires, we communicate more honestly, build authentic relationships, foster teamwork instead of rivalry. Shadow work in the workplace is not just personal growth, it's a way to cultivate healthier, more productive environments. Practical steps for shadow integration at work. Reflect on triggers. Notice moments when you feel threatened, angry, or jealous. Ask what internal fear or need is behind it. Own your ambition. Distinguish between ambition driven by purpose and ambition fueled by fear or insecurity. Practice empathy. Recognize that colleagues' difficult behaviors may be expressions of their shadow, not personal attacks. Set healthy boundaries. Protect your energy without creating walls of distrust. Encourage open communication. Create space for honest dialogue about conflicts and misunderstandings. The shadow as a catalyst for leadership. Leaders who confront their shadow tend to inspire trust and loyalty. They model authenticity, admit mistakes, and invite collaboration. By embracing shadow awareness, leaders can transform betrayal and competition into opportunities for growth and innovation. Chapter 9. Healing the Shadow. Forgiveness, acceptance, and integration. Betrayal cuts deep. It shakes our trust, fractures our sense of safety, and awakens the darkest parts of our shadow. Yet, within the pain of betrayal lies a profound opportunity, the chance to heal not just our relationships but our very selves. In this chapter, we explore how healing the shadow through forgiveness, acceptance, and integration can free us from the cycles of hurt and betrayal. The wounds of betrayal and the shadow's role. When betrayal strikes, it awakens the shadow, the parts of ourselves that feel rejected, abandoned, or unworthy. We react with anger, resentment, and sometimes revenge. But these emotions often bind us further to the shadow, deepening the pain. Jung taught that healing begins when we stop fighting the shadow and start embracing it. Forgiveness, more than letting go. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as forgetting or excusing the harm done. But in shadow work, forgiveness is an act of liberation. Forgiving others means releasing the grip of pain and blame that keeps the shadow alive. Forgiving ourselves means accepting our own flaws and mistakes, reducing shame and guilt. It's a courageous choice to reclaim our power and peace. Acceptance, meeting the shadow with compassion. Acceptance means acknowledging all parts of ourselves, including the shadow, without judgment. This involves recognizing the feelings of betrayal without denial or repression. It means understanding the motives behind others' actions, including their own shadow struggles. Compassion for ourselves and others softens the wounds and allows space for growth. Integration, bringing the shadow. Home integration is the ultimate goal. It means bringing the shadow from the unconscious into conscious awareness, making it part of our whole self. Integration transforms negative traits into sources of strength. For example, jealousy can become a signal for what we deeply desire. Anger can fuel assertiveness. When integrated, the shadow no longer controls us. We control it. Practical healing tools. Shadow dialogue. Write a conversation between yourself and your shadow, asking what it needs to feel seen and heard. Mindfulness and meditation practice, observing your feelings without judgment, especially in moments triggered by betrayal. Journaling forgiveness. Write letters of forgiveness to others and to yourself, even if you never send them. Therapeutic. Seek guidance from therapists or counselors skilled in Jungian or shadow work. The transformative power of healing. Healing the shadow does not erase betrayal's impact, but it changes our relationship to it. Pain becomes a teacher, wounds become gateways to wisdom, and betrayal becomes a catalyst for self-discovery. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Chapter 10. Embracing the Shadow. Living authentically beyond betrayal. As we reach the final chapter of this journey through Carl Jung's Shadow Theory and the psychology behind betrayal, it's time to consider what it truly means to live authentically, beyond fear, beyond judgment, beyond the pain of betrayal. To embrace the shadow is to embrace our whole selves, including the parts we have long denied or feared. It is a radical act of self-acceptance and liberation. What does it mean to embrace the shadow? Embracing the shadow means acknowledging all aspects of yourself, the light and the dark, rejecting the illusion of perfection and the need to hide your imperfections, accepting your vulnerability, your fears, your anger, and your desires as parts of a complex whole human being. When we embrace our shadow, we reclaim the energy and wisdom it holds, transforming pain into power. From victimhood to empowerment, betrayal can leave us feeling victimized, powerless, and broken. But shadow work teaches that we have a choice. Instead of being defined by betrayal, we can own our story without shame, learn from the experience, set boundaries that protect our integrity, choose growth over bitterness. This shift moves us from being passive sufferers to active creators of our destiny. Authentic living and shadow integration. Authentic living means expressing your true feelings and thoughts honestly, making decisions aligned with your deeper values, recognizing when the shadow tries to sabotage your growth, such as through self-doubt or blame, and consciously choosing another path. When integrated, the shadow becomes a source of creativity, intuition, and resilience. Transforming. Relationships embracing the shadow changes how we relate to others. We become less judgmental and more compassionate. We see others' flaws without needing to fix or blame them. We create connections based on truth, not projection. This deeper understanding reduces the risk of betrayal and fosters trust. The shadow as a path to wholeness. Jung believed the shadow is essential for individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. By integrating the shadow, we heal old wounds, reclaim lost parts of ourselves, open to greater creativity, spontaneity, and joy. The shadow is not a curse, but a vital part of the human experience. Practical steps to embrace your shadow. Daily self-reflection. Check in with your feelings and reactions. What is your shadow trying to tell you? Practice radical honesty. Speak your truth gently but firmly. Seek balance. Honor both your needs and those of others. Celebrate growth. Acknowledge when you move beyond old patterns. Conclusion: beyond betrayal, becoming whole. We began this journey by looking into the heart of one of humanity's most painful experiences, betrayal. Through the lens of Carl Jung's Shadow Theory, we've uncovered a powerful truth that betrayal, while deeply wounding, also offers a doorway to profound self-discovery and transformation. The shadow, that hidden part of the psyche we often reject or fear, holds the very keys to our healing. It reveals the truths we've buried, the pain we've ignored, and the strengths we've forgotten. Throughout this audiobook, we've learned how the shadow forms and how it drives betrayal, why denial, projection, and repression distort our relationships, how personal, romantic, social, and workplace betrayals can all be traced to unresolved shadows, and most importantly, how forgiveness, acceptance, and integration can guide us toward wholeness. Betrayal is not the end of the story. It's an invitation to go deeper, to look inward, and to reclaim the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way. By facing the shadow, we gain freedom from repeating destructive patterns. We break cycles of blame and shame. We step into our full, authentic selves, flawed yet fearless. Jung's wisdom teaches us that enlightenment doesn't come from chasing light, but from making the darkness conscious. True growth arises when we are brave enough to look into the mirror and say, "Yes, this too is me." As you move forward, remember, every betrayal is a mirror. Every emotion is a messenger, and every shadow, when welcomed, becomes a guide. Thank you for listening. May your journey through the shadow bring you not just healing, but the deep, enduring peace that comes from knowing who you truly are.